In the year 656 AD, Saint Sigebert was king of the Franks. Historical notice. From Volandus, Volume 1. The Mediomatrici, known to Ptolemy as the Mediomatrices, were an ancient people of Belgic Gaul. They lived in a vast region between the Rhine and Meuse rivers, also nourished by the Moselle flowing through it. The capital of these people was once Divodurum, or Diviodurum, but as that name faded from use, the city of the Mediomatrici was listed in the ancient records of the provinces and cities of Gaul. According to Ammianus Marcellinus, Book 15, it was also simply called the Mediomatrici, similar to how names like Tungri, Trevri, Ambiani, Remi, Parisi, Lingonus, Senionis, and others, once referred to the people and now designate cities. The name of the Mediomatrici eventually shortened to Metis, akin to saying Metis, and was also documented as Metis and Meti by others. This city still exists today, large, prosperous, and well fortified with its strategic location and construction, where the river Salia flows past and joins the Moselle at its walls. Theoderic established a royal seat there when Clovis's kingdom was divided, and it was maintained by his son Theodebert and grandson Theodebald. Clotaire I, Theoderic's brother, and great-grandfather of Saint Sigebert, took over the entire Frankish monarchy after Theodebald. In the division of Clotaire I's kingdom, Baron in the year 565, Section 6, and Petavius, Book 7 of the Rationarium Temporum, Chapter 6, believed Sigebert I had his royal seat at Reims, possibly misled by a faulty edition of Gregory of Tours. Furthermore, in his Writings of the History of the Franks, Volume 1, edited from 5 ancient manuscripts by Chesney, it reads in Book 4, Chapter 2, Sigebert also received Theoderic's kingdom by lot and held his seat at Metz. This is described in the same words by Fredegar in the Epitome of History, Chapter 55, and clearly explained by Amoyne in Book 3, Chapter 1. Sigebert, he says, was given the Mediomatricum, which is also Metz, once subject to his uncle Theoderic's rule. Childebert, Sigebert's father, is thought to have had his royal seat at Strasbourg by Coxius in Dagobert, Chapter 3, and Moraeus in the Genealogy of the Princes of Belgium, Chapter 1, or often resided there according to Wassenberg in Book 2 of Antiquities. In the region of Belgium of Gaul, under Hermanfred, the 12th Bishop of Verdun, Theodebert inherited the south from his father Childebert, with his seat at Metz. According to Fredegar, in Chapter 16 of the Chronicle, and as Amoyne adds in Book 3, Chapter 84, where earlier kings had established it, we believe Childebert and other kings also resided at Metz. Nevertheless, he might have occasionally stayed in Strasbourg, a city under his control. After Theodebert was killed, his brother Theoderic II took the throne but soon died in Metz from dysentery, leaving Sigebert II as his heir. Clotaire II, son of Chilperic and grandfather of Saint Sigebert, captured and killed Sigebert II before he could become king, thus regaining the entire Frankish monarchy. Later he appointed his son Dagobert as a co-ruler and governor of Austrasia. After the death of his father and brother Cheribert, Dagobert ruled alone and soon made Saint Sigebert, considered the third of this name, king of the Austrasians. Christopher Brouwer, in Book 7 of the Annals of Trier, states that he resided in Aachen, as evidenced by a document granted to Saint Maduald, the Archbishop of Trier, which we will show is heavily interpolated. Aegidius Galenius, in the Cologne Chronicles, claims that he held court at Andernach in the Cologne district of the Lorraine territory. The same Galenius, in Book 1 on the Magnitude of Cologne, Section 3, argues that Cologne was the capital and the metropolis of the Austrasian kingdom under all the kings from Theoderic I to Saint Sigebert. He adds, do not doubt the dignity and prerogative of the metropolis in Austrasia. Note that Dagobert's son Sigebert and the administration of the kingdom were under the authority and control of Saint Cunibert, the bishop of the Ubi. This is what Fredegar writes in Chronicle 55, stating that Cunibert, the bishop of Cologne, and Adalgisel, the mayor of the palace, were appointed to govern the kingdom. However, he asserts that King Sigebert had his seat in the city of Metz, where Saint Cunibert frequently traveled to Cologne and stayed for extended periods. King Dagobert ordered that the testament, signed by his sons, Saint Sigebert and Clovis, be delivered to Metz, the royal city, instead of Cologne, Andernach, Aachen, or any other notable places in Austrasia. For more details on this testament, you can refer to Amoyne, Book 4, Chapter 30. Metz is also mentioned as the royal city of Saint Sigebert in the Life of Saint Hodelin, written by Notgore on February 3, and in his own acts, which state that he was buried in the monastery of Saint Martin by the Moselle, a place he had built. The acts note the day of his death on the calendar of February, where his name appears in the appendix of Usured by the Carthusian of Cologne and Milanus. They say, in Metz, confessor of Sigebert. Another account states, in the city of Metz, Sigebert, king and confessor, who among other virtues, built 20 monasteries. Milanus further discusses him in the birthdays of the saints of Belgium under the title, On Saint Sigebert, confessor and king of Austrasia. Then, in the city of Metz, the deposition of Saint Sigebert, king, confessor of Christ, and so on. An epitome of his life consistently refers to him as a saint. Peter Galicini, in his Martyrology, notes, in Metz, Saint Sigebert, king and confessor, who stood out from many admirable acts of piety, notably building 20 monasteries. Moraes celebrates him in the Belgian Fasti, Galenius in the Cologne Fasti, Canisius in the German Martyrology, Genius in the birthdays of canonized saints, Ferrarius in the General Catalogue of Saints, and various others in the appendix to the Roman Martyrology in both Belgian and French languages. Saussay, in the French Martyrology, mentions him on the next day, February 2, with this tribute. In Metz, Saint Sigebert, king of Austrasia and confessor, who was a devoted promoter of the worship of God, built 20 monasteries, and gave generous alms to churches and the poor. For these merits and other exalted acts of piety, he achieved a heavenly kingdom in place of an earthly one. His body was buried in the church of Saint Martin, which he founded himself, and soon after burial, it was said to shine with miracles. 500 years later, it was discovered to be incorrupt, astounding everyone who saw it. This account is from Saussay. We'll talk about the monasteries he built later. After St. Martin's in Metz, the abbeys of Stavelot and Malmedy stand out in the Ardennes, where altars dedicated to Saint Sigebert are present in their churches. Images show him crowned in royal fashion, draped in a mantle embroidered with lilies, holding 2 torches in his hands, crafted in both color and carving. He is honored there on February 1, with special rituals and the ringing of large bells. The festival of the translation of his body, which took place in 1063, is celebrated on June 30 at Milanus's, in the Natalis Sanctorum Belgi by the Carthusians of Cologne, in the appendix of Usured, and Canisius, in the Martyrologium Germanicum, the translation of Saint Sigebert the Confessor at Metz, which the February 1 entry discusses. The ancient veneration is confirmed by both the history of miracles once performed at his tomb, and, as mentioned, by his name being included in sacred litanies. Baronius, in the year 658, number 3, presents Sigebert as a model to be emulated, praising him as a most commendable prince, a lover of justice, and a strict observer of religion. Enjoying peace, as he was free from external and civil wars, he dedicated himself entirely to building monasteries and other works of piety. Saint Sigebert, the King. His life. Written by Sigebert, a monk from Gembloux. As found in Bollandus, Volume 1. Chapter 1. The Ancestors and Birth of Saint Sigebert.
In the year of the Lord's incarnation 586, Lothair II, the son of King Chilperic and Fredegund, began his reign in France as a young boy. When he reached an age of understanding, he focused on moral integrity. As a result, God exalted him to the point where he was deemed worthy to receive the sole monarchy of the Frankish kingdom. In the 39th year of his reign, he brought his son Dagobert into a partnership of the kingdom. To ensure that the freedom of royal power and the intemperance of youth did not lead Dagobert astray from the path of righteousness, Lothair appointed distinguished men of power and holiness to guide him, namely, Saint Arnulf, the bishop of Metz and former major of the palace, and Pepin, the major of the palace, who at that time was preeminent among all courtiers in power and wisdom. With these mentors, Dagobert expanded the Frankish kingdom further and worked especially hard to defeat the Saxons, who frequently harassed his kingdom's borders with raids. With his father Lothar's help, he defeated them so thoroughly that he slew their king Berthoald and slaughtered all the Saxons who exceeded the length of his sword. Despite such promising beginnings, after the death of his father, King Dagobert gradually began to deviate from his commitment to justice. He did so with the counsel of Prince Pippin and Cunibert, the Archbishop of Cologne, whom Pepin had chosen as a close friend and intimate advisor after the death of Saint Arnulf. Although King Dagobert was an excellent warrior, a devout lover of God's priests and churches, a generous supporter of Christ's poor, and an executor of many good deeds, he suffered greatly from the vice of carnal incontinence. This led to a disgraceful stain on his renowned name and, more seriously, to the wrath of the King of Kings against him. He dismissed his queens for false reasons, replacing them with others, and even while betrothed, he pursued the affections of concubines. Although he was devoted to physical relationships, he had no hope of having children, as none of his many wives had given him a son. This distressed the king greatly because he felt he had offended God, especially since he knew that none of the royal lineage of his ancestors remained except for him and his brother Sigebert. Sigebert, due to his excessive simplicity, was considered less suitable for the throne. Despite his despair about having children, he did not lose hope in God's mercy. He prayed fervently for a son to be given to him by God's will, who could succeed him in ruling the kingdom. The just and merciful Lord, who is drawn to anger by human errors, is also moved to compassion by humble prayers. Indeed, while King Dagobert was traveling through Austrasia in the first year of his reign, he married a girl named Regentrude, who was praised for her beauty and was not of insignificant birth among the Austrasians. By God's will, she bore him a son in that same year.
Chapter 2. Baptism and Education.
The king, thrilled by this news, began considering which holy man he should entrust with the task of baptizing the boy. At that time, in the kingdom of the Franks, there were many men renowned for their holiness and virtues. Among them, Saint Amandus of Elnon shone most brightly. Originally from Aquitaine, he followed Christ, leaving everything behind. He found solace in the divine preaching of voluntary pilgrimages, and through his devotion, he gathered an abundant harvest for Christ throughout France. Messengers searched for him far and wide, following the king's urgent command. Amandus, who had once been the only priest brave enough to rebuke the king for his serious crimes, had been expelled from the king's realm by his orders and was preaching in the more remote parts of France. Finally, he was found and urged to go to the king as soon as possible. Remembering the apostles' command that every soul should be subject to higher authorities, Romans 13 verse 1, he went to the king, who was staying at the villa in Clipiaco. Upon seeing the blessed Amandus, the king was filled with great joy, and, falling at his feet, he begged for forgiveness for the great offense he had committed against him. But Amandus, being very gentle, quickly lifted him from the ground and graciously forgave him. Then the king said to the saint, "I regret acting foolishly against you. I pray that you do not remember the offense I caused and that you do not disdain my request. God has given me a son, not because of any merits of mine, and I ask you to baptize him and accept him as your spiritual son." The man of God strongly refused, knowing that it is written that one serving God should not be involved in worldly affairs, to Timothy 2 verse 4, and that a quiet and remote person should not frequent royal palaces. He then withdrew from the king's presence. Once again, the king sent distinguished men from the palace, dressed in secular attire, Adenas, who was the bishop of Rouen, and Eligius, the bishop of Noyon. They humbly asked the man of God to agree to the king's requests, to honor the king's son with a sacred baptismal font, and to raise and teach him divine law as soon as possible. They mentioned that if the man of God accepted, he would be granted the freedom to preach in the king's realm or anywhere he chose. They acknowledged that this favor could help win over many nations. Finally, overwhelmed by their pleas, he promised he would do it. Upon hearing that the holy man had agreed to his requests, the king ordered the boy to be brought, and he hurried to Orléans. There, his brother Sigebert joined him for the same purpose, to receive his son from the sacred baptism. The boy, who was said to be no more than 40 days old, was brought to the holy man. He took the child to be initiated into the sacred mysteries and made him a catechumen with a solemn blessing. After the blessing was finished, and no one from those standing around had responded, "Amen." God opened the mouth of the infant. He responded in a clear voice, "Amen," for all to hear. Immediately, the holy man regenerated him with sacred baptism, naming him Sigebert. He, along with Sigebert, the king's brother, received him from the sacred font. The king and his entire army rejoiced with great joy, and soon after, he placed the holy man in a place of great veneration, enthroning him on the seat of the Church of Maastricht. O marvelous grace of God! O praiseworthy power of His! Who would not exclaim in praise of Him? Who would not rejoice over the riches of His goodness? He who once sanctified the prophet Jeremiah in his mother's womb, and whose spirit inspired him and his mother, more than a prophet, John, leaped for joy. Even before being born, The herald foresaw the coming king and greeted him with joy. Now, through the mouth of the holy bishop, he infused the newborn child with the gift of spiritual blessing, showing through this miracle that he would be a chosen vessel. As soon as he was cleansed from the stain of original sin, he was filled with the grace of the Holy Spirit, truly blessed in all things, through whom the name of the Lord is still blessed in the Church and will be blessed forever. Glory either barely or never escapes envy. Pepin, the mayor of the palace, conducted himself cautiously and wisely in all matters of the kingdom or palace. He was good in counsel, formidable in strength, and commendable in all aspects of justice and faith. The more he surpassed everyone in glory, the greater the envy he stirred up against himself from almost all the Austrasians, with rivals watching to remove him from the king's side. They sought to either separate him from the king's heart or cause his death. But he, knowing how to control his mind, refused to be overcome by evil and overcame evil with good. To free himself and the entire kingdom from the scandal of discord, he took up the care of King Sigebert's son and yielded to the faction of his envious opponents, going to Sigebert, the king's brother residing in Aquitaine. Not long after, when the cloud of the storm had passed, he returned more joyfully through the harmony of peaceful times.
Chapter 3. The Kingdom of Austrasia. The death of Dagobert.
A man named Samo, a Frank by birth and a merchant by trade, journeyed to the people of the Wends through his strength and skill. They elevated him to the position of king. A conflict emerged between him and King Dagobert, leading him to frequently cross the borders of his kingdom, fiercely ravaging Thuringia and other nearby Frankish regions. Because of this, in the 11th year of his reign, King Dagobert traveled to Metz, where he called for a meeting of nobles and bishops. With their advice and consent, he elevated his son Sigebert to the kingdom of Austrasia, allowing him to establish Metz as his royal seat. He also provided him with a sufficient portion of the treasury and formalized the entire arrangement with a royal decree and the testimony of the nobles. Concerned about the youth of the new king, he entrusted his guardianship to Cunibert, the Archbishop of Cologne, and Duca del Gisso. He placed the care and management of the Austrasian kingdom in the hands of Prince Pippin. From that day forward, the insolence of the Wends was curbed, as the strength of the Austrasians met them strongly and successfully, with frequent battles holding back their incursions. A year later, King Dagobert had a son named Clovis. Once again, with all the leading men of Austrasia and Neustria gathered in a general assembly, he arranged the division of the kingdom between his two sons in their presence, with their approval and advice. He confirmed this with mutual agreements and oaths, establishing that, with a fixed boundary between the two kingdoms, Sigebert would rule over Austrasia, while Clovis would govern Neustria. The part of France stretching to the south and east was called Austrasia, while the region extending to the north and west was known as Neustria. King Dagobert, having ruled both kingdoms justly and wisely, ensured that his brothers never harbored any hatred towards each other, and that the kingdom, divided within itself, would not be devastated by civil war. In the 17th year of his reign, he passed away and was buried in the Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris, leaving the kingdom at peace with foreign nations and with its borders intact. After his death, the two kings and brothers, Sigebert and Clovis, each ruled their own kingdom wisely and were powerful among their people. They were approachable to their subjects and formidable to their opponents. While they maintained harmony pleasing to God in all things between themselves, there was nearly a discord over one matter. Some nobles, who sided with Clovis, attempted to oppose King Sigebert over his rightful share of the paternal treasure. However, with the strong and reasonable intervention of Prince Pepin and Archbishop Cunibert, the reluctant nobles of Neustria were compelled, through justice, to agree to a meeting at the village of Compiègne, where the royal treasure was to be fairly divided, and each would receive their appropriate share. They gathered there, the treasure was divided equally, and the due portion was presented to King Sigebert in Metz.
Chapter 4. The death of Saint Pepin. Major Domo Grimoald. The Thuringian War.
The following year brought great sorrow to King Sigebert and his kingdom, as Pippin the Elder, a key figure in the royal household, passed away. He had been like a father to Sigebert from a young age, supporting him through his youth with strength and guidance. Pippin was invaluable to the kingdom, renowned for his lineage, power, wisdom, and bravery. He appointed his son Grimoald as his successor and left behind two daughters, Gertrude and Bega, to continue his legacy. One daughter, Gertrude, chose to dedicate her life to Christ rather than marry, serving in the Novel convent founded by her mother and continuing to nurture spiritual growth. Her sister Bega married Ansigisel, the son of Saint Arnulf, Bishop of Metz, and through her lineage restored the royal dignity, which had been neglected by the Frankish kings. She gave birth to Pippin, who fathered Charles, known as Martel Charles, then fathered Pippin the king, and Pippin, in turn, fathered Charles the Great, king of the Franks and emperor of the Romans. Charles rose to such heights of honor and power that no Frankish king before or after could compare to him. Now, let's quickly return to our main story. Grimoald, after his father Pippin, took up the role of major domo, ruling with strength in King Sigebert's court and managing both domestic and military matters with bravery. Everything seemed secure, with neighboring disturbances quelled and no threats in sight. However, the envy of the wicked found a way to sow discord within the kingdom. Otto, son of Euro, who had been a guardian to Sigebert since his youth, grew jealous of Grimoald and, by rallying some noblemen, attempted to seize power for himself. Radolf, the Duke of Thuringia, was a warlike man who became arrogant due to his successes. After frequently defeating the Wends in battles, he began to act more insolently towards his lord and king, Sigebert, looking down on his youth and causing significant trouble for the kingdom. His recklessness reached a point where, after ambushing Sigebert's army, he dared to inflict serious losses on the Franks. This misfortune brought great grief to King Sigebert, who was in the 9th year of his reign and just 12 years old at the time. But as Sigebert grew older, he gained strength and skill, and he didn't stop pursuing his enemies until he subdued their pride. He brought the Thuringians, who had been rebellious under Radolf's influence, back under his rule, defeated and humiliated. Otho, who envied Grimoald's power and tried to seize it for himself, was killed through Grimoald's plot by Lutherius, the Duke of the Alemanni, to Grimoald's advantage. Thus, Grimoald was strengthened as a leader.
Chapter 5. Endowed monasteries, charities, death, burial.
There was deep peace and quiet throughout all the borders of the Austrasians, with both foreign and domestic adversaries calmed everywhere, thanks to the power of God enhancing the strength of King Sigebert, whom he favored from the early stages of his life. The same God who gave Solomon wisdom, wealth, and power in his youth also blessed him with these gifts. Indeed, if I dare to use the words of the Lord, I would confidently say that something greater than Solomon is here. Luke 11:31. While Solomon lost the wisdom he received in the night and through a dream by turning away from the worship of God, and used his wealth and power to the ruin of his soul, seeing it diminish in his descendants because of his sins, our peaceful Solomon, on the other hand, turned his wisdom, wealth, and power to the benefit of his soul and earned spiritual multiplication in his descendants through good deeds. It often happens in peaceful kingdoms that idleness and moral corruption lead people to misuse the security of peace. This king, however, celebrated the enduring peace of his time and worked to confront the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places, seeking to recruit spiritual armies to fight alongside him. He built 12 monasteries in different parts of his kingdom, and generously provided them with necessary resources from his own revenues, so that those living there under the apostolic rule could reap their worldly goods while sowing spiritual ones for themselves. Among these, the monasteries of Stavelot and Malmedy stand out in our vicinity. Located within the Ardennes forest, they were constructed with the cooperation of the mayor of the palace, Grimoald, and entrusted to Saint Remaclus, Bishop of Tongeren, to be organized. He especially relied on the counsel of Remaclus and Cunibert, Bishop of Cologne, and was inspired by the examples of holy men to undertake such deeds. To learn more from one example, let us gather from these two how great the pious king's generosity was in enriching holy places. When it was heard that in the regions Saint Remaclus was assigned, the practice of holy religion was flourishing, especially since the bishop himself had set aside his episcopal duties to lead a more disciplined life there. He was granted 12 leagues in width and length from the forest itself. No one would oppose him or his successors in this area. This was confirmed with a testament and imperial endorsement. King Sigebert, truly deserving of the royal title because he governed himself wisely, took great care to distribute earthly riches to the least of Christ's followers so he might eventually attain the highest good, which is found only in eternal happiness. He understood that earthly happiness is always limited in some way, preventing it from achieving complete goodness. Although wealth, honors, power, and glory came to him abundantly due to his royal standing, he still lamented that much was missing in his happiness because he lacked the sweet affection of children. Therefore, he was more eager to build monasteries for the edification of souls, and he distributed his wealth to Christ more generously, since besides Christ, to whom these things would go, he had no legitimate heir. Finding Grimoald, the mayor of the palace, to be faithful, obedient, and a collaborator in all matters, he appointed Grimoald's son, Childebert, as heir to the kingdom of Austrasia, but only on the condition that he would die without children. The king, unaware of future events, acted on what seemed right at the time. Later, he had a son, whom he named Dagobert after his father. He revoked the prior testament and entrusted his son to the care of Grimoald, ensuring his son could be raised and protected in the kingdom of Austrasia under Grimoald's power. Such was King Sigebert's life, made magnificent among men by temporal power and commended to God in all things by justice. Before God, it was made acceptable by his dove-like simplicity, although he also possessed serpent-like cleverness. Wisdom, speaking through Solomon, tells us, "Remove the dross from the silver, and a vessel for the refiner will emerge. Remove wickedness from the king's presence, and his throne will be established in righteousness." Proverbs 25:4-5. The king, in whose hand are the hearts of kings, has purified his servant Sigebert, who shone like silver through the purity of his life and wisdom, making him a vessel of mercy in this world. Since God tells us, "Give alms, and behold, everything is clean for you." Luke 11:41. Who can doubt that God has washed away this king's sins, which clung to him due to earthly contamination and the burdens of ruling? These sins were like dust, wiped away by his acts of charity, which continue to be spent daily in the many monasteries he built, all for the praise and glory of Christ's name. He removed wickedness from the king's presence to establish righteousness on his throne. Because the just live by faith, he disregarded the pride of earthly kingship. Now, crowned with righteousness and adorned with victory, he co-reigns with Christ in the heavens. The king, who is fearsome to all the kings of the earth and takes away the spirit of princes, ensured that the world's wickedness would not sway his soldier's mind. He took him from this wicked world through a bitter death in the prime of his youth, granting him true dignity in the heavenly court. He died on the 01020662, at the age of 31, in the 28th year of his reign, in the year 662 from the incarnation of the Lord, 263 years after the passing of Saint Martin. Leaving remarkable monuments behind, he chose to be buried in Metz, the seat of his kingdom, in the basilica he constructed with royal generosity to the glory and praise of God, in honor of Saint Martin, the glorious confessor.